As the United States rail network expanded further, two railroads would dare to cross the desolate and harsh Northern Passage. The Northern Pacific and Great Northern would complete the task in 1883 and 1893. Realizing the lack of connections to the growing railroad hub of Chicago, the CB&Q filled this gap in the market due to its distinct leverage compared to the Milwaukee and WC. Since the late 19th century, the Q, NP, and GN all have harmoniously transported goods together throughout the northern U.S. markets. That practice still is true in the modern day, with all lines now being a part of the BNSF. In this film, we will traverse BNSF's lifeline to the northern transcontinental route. Starting from Chicagoland, we will head across the northern Illinois flatlands before descending into the Mississippi River through the driftless region of northwestern Illinois and western Wisconsin, running over 260 miles to the city of La Crosse, Wisconsin. This is BNSF's Aurora Subdivision, the gateway to the northern Transcon. Departing Aurora, Illinois, the Aurora Sub heads due west through the exclaves of Sugar Grove, Big Rock, Hinckley, and Waterman before turning north at Shabbona to cross the Union Pacific at the Double Diamonds of Rochelle. From there, the line begins to enter the winding hills of the driftless region, which owe its topography by being missed by the shifting glaciers of the Ice Age. Following a generally western track descending in and out of the Rock River Valley before descending again into the Mississippi River Valley at Savanna. The Barstow Sub from Galesburg joins in, and we cross the CPKC Chicago Sub, then turn north to follow the mighty Mississippi River. We'll pass by Galena and through East Dubuque before entering the Badger State. The hills are only getting taller as we pass through isolated communities like Glen Haven and Cassville before running alongside Wildlusing State Park and into Prairie du Chien. Crossing the Wisconsin River and WSOR, our journey continues through Lynxville, DeSoto, and Genoa before arriving at the terminal city of La Crosse, where the St. Croix Sub begins and crosses the CPKC Toma Sub. Our first shot is at the east end of BNSF's Eola Yard. Although we're still on the Chicago subdivision, Eola is a major hub for operations for the BNSF in northern Illinois. The first train of this program is this eastbound Autorack train from Tacoma, Washington. This train came from the Northern Transcon, and after a crew change here in Eola, is now headed onto the connection to BNSF's trackage rights on the Canadian National's ex-Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern line. BNSF was granted trackage rights between Eola and Joliet when the CN bought the EJ&E due to BNSF's interest in purchasing this section of trackage. The only BNSF trains that use these rights, though, are the eastbound Autorack and International Stack trains that terminate at Logistics Park, Chicago, which is located just southwest of Joliet in Elwood. Their westbound counterparts use the Chillicothe and Barstow subdivisions due to traffic congestion on the CN causing consistent delays. As the rear DPU from our Autorack train passes by, the head end of this Galesburg to Eola manifest train rolls past us. This manifest has to do an unusual move today and reverse into Eola Yard. We're now at the busiest place on the BNSF system, Control Point West Eola. For a while, this control point held the company record for most moves in one day due to the vast amount of traffic that flows through here, including nearly 100 weekday moves just for Metra. On this Sunday afternoon though, things stay relatively quiet compared to the rest of the week. This inbound manifest from Galesburg slips into the siding, which is bound for interchange with the Canadian National, and will terminate at their Kirk Yard in Gary, Indiana. Meanwhile, the dispatcher has this Canadian-bound empty coal coke train tied down on Main 1, while a manifest train currently working to West Yard is tied up on Main 3, as the yard crew works the East Yard. Eola Yard is a pretty decently sized yard, with 30 tracks in total split evenly between the triple track main. A majority of carload traffic off the Chicago sub, the eastern end of both the Aurora and Mendota subdivisions, a few branch lines around Aurora itself, and interchange traffic with the Canadian National and Illinois Railway feeds into this terminal's traffic. In addition, the leads to Metra's Hill Yard and Aurora Transportation Center depart the triple track main line on the west end. Next up, the crew from our manifest on Main 3 has picked up extra power that Eola is sending to Northtown from inside the yard and is now heading out to attach it to their train. Although first, they will be interrupted by Amtrak's California Zephyr number 6 with brand new ALC 42s number 348 and 349 in tow. After NSI and TW gets their new power attached, we see this Portland, Oregon-bound hotshot intermodal fly by on Main 2 as the East Yard crew makes a pull down. Later, our yard crew is making a long pull down as the Illinois RailNet delivers yet another train of sand to be sent further on the BNSF system. This would wrap up our time here at Eola as we start our journey westward. Our next stop is near the end of the Chicago subdivision at Aurora Junction. Downtown Aurora is seen in the background as this westbound Hotshot Z curves onto the Aurora Sub. Aurora Junction is not a super complicated control point in the grand scheme of things. From left to right, you have Main 2 and 1 of the Chicago Sub, a spur to the Burlington Junction Yard in Montgomery nicknamed Sheepyards. Then curving to the west is the Aurora Sub Main and a short 5,000 foot long siding. Coming out of Aurora, our first stop is in Sugar Grove, where we would see this Portland-bound Z train rocket out of the suburbs. Hot on its heels, we would see this empty grain train begin its final leg westward to Baca Rough Grain, which we will see again in Flagg Center. As it rounds the curve, it passes the east end of Sugar Grove Siding. At only 5,700 feet, this siding is not used very often to make meats unless it's one of the locals. Sugar Grove is the first among the exurbs along the C&I. With a population of just over 9,000 residents, it is still able to maintain a bit of small-town presence, although it is mostly dwarfed by the fact that it is so close to Aurora. We move now to Big Rock, which is the first small town on our trip with only 1,500 residents. Coming around the curve is this empty coal coke train from Burns Harbor, Indiana, making its way back to Western Canada. We are now at one of my favorite spots on the Aurora Subdivision. Welcome to Hinckley, Illinois, where this Seattle-bound hotshot flies past us at the classic-themed diner called Dairy Joy. Dairy Joy is a great place to grab a bite up here because they're very affordable and include trackside outdoor seating. It's also not uncommon to see a few classic cars here, especially on beautiful days like today. Just west of town is Mered Siding, where on this gloomy winter day we watched this westbound manifest knock down the signal as it races west. These signals are a relic from the Burlington Northern days and have stood the test of time, still serving into the PTC era. Next up is Waterman, which is the site of the old DeKalb, now Bayer seed plant. Here we first catch this Tacoma to Chicago Logistics Park vehicle train thunder towards Eola. A few blocks further west and on a brighter day, we see this Cicero-bound hotshot stack train fly through the curvature on the edge of town. Next up is a place on the railroad called BX. This is where Union Pacific's Troy Grove branch crosses the BNSF at grade alongside US Route 30. This is also where we'll see this Wedren-bound empty unit sand train accelerate out of Shabbona siding. Just west is Shabbona, where the BNSF has a 10,825-foot long siding and is a very popular spot to meet and pass trains, as is the case right now. This Portland to Chicago hotshot flies past our Wedren empty unit sand drag. Next up is Lee, a very middle of nowhere Illinois town that only has a church, a bar, and a grain elevator. This manifest headed to the Belt Railway of Chicago trundles on through after waiting for all sorts of traffic to overtake it in Steward. We're now in Steward. On this crisp fall morning, we get to see this eastbound Q train round the curve and pass by the old depot. This line's flagship passenger train, the Empire Builder, has long left these rails as Amtrak opted to shift the route on the Milwaukee Road alignment to pick up Milwaukee. That being said, sometimes the Builder has to take its historic routing, this time due to a derailment in central Wisconsin. On the north side of town, the Aurora Subdivision becomes double-track through the major junction in Rochelle. On this Saturday, we would see local RSHI 457 make its final stride into Rochelle. Normally, the Rochelle area is served by RSHI 476, which is based out of Rochelle itself. But on Saturdays, or if extra service is needed during the week, either 457 or 458 will make a run from Eola to Rochelle and back. We would see it pass by this tied-down international stack train with the Rochelle Industrial Park seen in the distance. We're now located in the middle of the Rochelle Industrial Park, at the junction of both major Western Class 1 railroads, two moderate interstates, both of which have easy connections to cross-country highways, as well as its close range to Chicagoland while enjoying cheaper land prices. Rochelle has been a booming hub of commerce. Here we see this Tacoma to Logistics Park Chicago autorack train slow down past BNSF's Rochelle Yard. Industrial switching in Rochelle is handled by the Burlington Junction Railroad. This switching line interchanges with the Union Pacific on the north side of the park, while BNSF interchanges within the BJRY. We're now located at Rochelle's railroad hotspot, the at-grade diamond between the BNSF Aurora Subdivision and Union Pacific's Geneva Subdivision. Here, this Wedren, Illinois-bound empty sand train crosses the diamonds as many railfans both watch in person and virtually by Virtual Railfan, Trains Magazine, and Railstream. Late afternoon to evening is always busy here, as the BNSF is squeezing 2 westbounds after they've been waiting for 4 from the Union Pacific. First through is our NSI NTW we saw at Mered. Chasing it down is this empty bare table train headed to Tacoma, Washington. Another Twilight adventure brings us trackside for this empty phosphate train, of which come from Florida's Bone Valley. CSX brings loads northwest on B207. Then on BNSF rails, they primarily go to destinations in the Dakotas and Kansas. These trains, oddly enough, ride on BNSF rails under grain train symbols, hence why this empty is an X train. Once in Chicago, this empty will head back south on B208 and continue the cycle. Tonight's edition has a cool visitor, that being the Operation Lifesaver SD70 Mac nose out on the rear. On the same night as our other reroute we saw in Steward, this combined eastbound Empire Builder and Borealis train would roll through with a classic Dash 8 wide cab up front. This train would end up in Chicago Union Station just after 2 a.m., over 9 hours late for the Builder and 6.5 hours for the Borealis. Back in the daylight now, we would catch this NSI NTW Cross the Diamonds. This is very commonly an afternoon train here on the Aurora, and like today, sometimes has power from the Norfolk Southern. In addition to the BNSF, Union Pacific's transcontinental line crosses through in Rochelle, although the Union Pacific has more traffic through the diamonds than the BNSF. Here we would see this manifest slowly trundle on Main 2 while a hotshot stack train would overtake it on Main 1. Our parting shot from Rochelle is of Union Pacific's Big Boy 4014 from when it rolled through town as part of its 2024 Midwestern tour. West of Rochelle is Flagg Center, which is where the Aurora shrinks back into single main territory. We spot our now loaded grain train we saw in Sugar Grove work its way east towards Eola. Our train, now on its way to Texas, drops the approach signal onto the double track. In the distance, you can see Rochelle, which is where our train here would get stuck due to a Union Pacific manifest blocking the diamond for an extended amount of time. The track curving off to the right belongs to the Illinois Railway out of Rockford. At the time of recording, this was only used to bring locomotives to and from their shop, which is located on the Ottawa branch. As of publishing though, repair facilities have been built in Rockford, and the line here is severed at the CPKC in Davis Junction. Our next stop is just outside Chana, Illinois, as the grade descends westward into the Rock River Valley. The next town is Oregon, Illinois. The Aurora first crosses the Rock River before charging back uphill out of the river valley. Historically, this is the starting point where the CB&Qs started construction connecting the existing Chicago and Iowa Railroad to the new St. Paul Main Line. Let's watch this westbound Z fly by. Oregon has two sand mines on the west side of town, both of which are switched out by the Illinois Railway. This is also the furthest west the Rochelle or Eola locals will turn. After flying over the yard, we see the Illinois Railway's Mount Morris branch split off to the north, which is the historical main line for the Chicago and Iowa. More on that in a bit. The Oregon Depot is now the site of the Oregon Depot Museum. Currently open on Saturdays, there are displays of the railroad history of the Aurora Subdivision and the CB&Q as a whole. In addition, the CB&Q's Silverview Observation Dome, which frequently traveled on this very line on the Twin Cities Zephyr, is on display. We're just west of town looking towards the two sand mines the Illinois Railway switches and the BNSF main line. Our vantage point is the historical main line, which is now the Illinois Railway's Mount Morris branch. This line in its current day is used for car storage for about 2 miles. Tracks first came to this area by the Ogle and Carroll Railroad, which was chartered in 1857, but didn't reach town until 1871. This line was included in James Frederick Joy's Burlington and Michigan Central, which built a main line from Aurora, Illinois off the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy to the Illinois Central Gruber line in Forreston in 1872. In 1874, Francis Hinckley built the Chicago, Rockford, and Northern from Flagg Center to Rockford. These lines later merged into the Chicago and Iowa Railroad. Come 1885, the Chicago, Burlington, and Northern was chartered from Oregon and Fulton to Galena via Savanna and from East Dubuque to St. Paul, which was completed by 1886. In 1889, the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy purchased the Chicago, Burlington, and Northern, and 3 years later bought the Chicago and Iowa. No major changes were made until 1938, when the CB&Q abandoned the line between Mount Morris and Forreston. This branch line was sold to the Illinois RailNet in 2004 and would later become today's Illinois Railway. And the last train on this line was pulled by a pair of ex-Union Pacific Jeeps in 2012, ending the legacy of this historic line. Coming back to mainline action, we're just west of Oregon at the Pine Creek Historic Wooden Bridge Park. This is a nice quiet spot out in the hills west of Oregon. Local residents maintain this small park to have open houses in the summer where local rail fans gather to watch trains. Today is a brisk winter day and we'll end up seeing this westbound hotshot with a quiet horn. Stratford siding is located just around the curve outside of Frame, but we'll skip that place and head straight for Polo. Polo is the site of the Bacher Rough grain elevator. First, we'll watch this Portland to Chicago Q train drop the signal for the loop switch on this windy late winter evening. We'd set up for this outbound grain train to prepare for its departure east. After spinning the train to the switch, the crew would arrange their power one by two due to the train technically running backwards to Eola. Unfortunately, this train would end up having issues setting up their DPU and would not depart until deep into the darkness. The next siding is located on the west side of Milledgeville, where another eastbound queue flies around the curve. The town is on the east end of the just under 7,000 foot siding and is a common meeting place due to the lack of any crossings. Chadwick is home to the Northwestern Illinois Model Railroad Club, which is conveniently located across the street from another 7,000-foot siding. Here we get to watch a meet take place as this eastbound Q meets a westbound Z. This siding is used commonly for nearly rolling meets like this due to the town getting cut in half whenever the crossing is activated. Such is the case, but due to the excellent dispatching, the meet blocked town for only 10 minutes. Burke is the last siding on the C&I, which is the common name for the eastern half of the Aurora Sub. From the top of the nearby hills, we see this eastbound Z train start to dig in on its ascent out of the Mississippi River Valley. CPKC's Chicago subdivision is also visible, located about a quarter mile to the north near that classic grain silo. Our next stop is Savanna, Illinois. From this point onward, the majority of the railroad is double main tracked other than a few river crossings. About a mile or so east of the diamond here, the Barstow subdivision joins into the Aurora Subdivision, which brings plenty of extra traffic to and from Galesburg and points south. Funny enough, the BNSF engine here is being used as local power for CPKC, which crosses at grade here. Stay tuned for a video showing off their operations in the future. On a different day, we'll see this eastbound Hotshot Z from St. Paul cross the diamond here. In the distance, CPKC train 253 waits for a clearing in the BNSF traffic before it gets its signal. The diamond here is an automatic diamond and is first come, first serve. The classic searchlights here are speculated to be replaced, though, as CPKC is actively adding CTC to this line. After our eastbound clears, 253 will make its way into Savanna Yard. The pair of Southern Bell units is all common now after the merger. We move north a few blocks, now next to Viseron Grain, where peak harvest is in full swing, with a non-stop flow of trucks bringing grain to be loaded on barges. Meanwhile, a pair of manifest trains meet here, one of which containing an executive Mack and the Frankenbonnet. The river is busy with people enjoying the last few temperate days out on the water before the hard Midwestern winter will kick in. Meanwhile, we would see yet another manifest train here, this time including a visitor from Montana, which is becoming ever more common after the BNSF takeover of the MRL. Here's a blast from the past. Taconite used to traverse this line. Back in 2020, I captured this empty headed back to Minnesota just north of town. These trains were abolished due to the customer idling the mill in late 2023. Directly above that last shot is the point lookout of the Mississippi Palisades State Park, where this eastbound manifest winds around the river as the sun is getting low. Scenes like this become more common now as the Aurora parallels the mighty Mississippi River through the driftless area all the way to La Crosse. Next, we wind up outside Galena, Illinois, at the bottom of Chestnut Mountain Ski Resort. This is always a fun location to enjoy the sights and trains along the frozen landscape. This Q train, which we saw earlier in this program in Chadwick, snuck up on me at this spot. Next, this westbound V train flies by on this warm winter day as more skiers come down the slopes. now dead west of Galena at a spot on the railroad called Portage, which is the eastern end of the Canadian National Trackage Rights. In the distance, the CN curves sharply to the east to follow the hillside and the Galena River. Meanwhile, the BNSF continues to follow the Mississippi. The Chicago Great Western also had an alignment through here, which you can find out more on the Be Historic channel, which follows the historical CGW alignment from Chicago to Olwyn, Iowa. While you're in the area, you absolutely have to check out downtown Galena. It is an absolutely beautiful town and also features one of the first rail lines in Illinois, now belonging to the Canadian National. This M338 makes all sorts of noise navigating the tight curvature and the climb upgrade. Back on the BNSF, and we're now a block away from downtown East Dubuque, watching this westbound Z roll through the interlocking here on Main 2. The track arrangement here is interesting. Starting from the north, there's a short team track, Main 1, a 6,400 foot siding, Main 2, and another short siding for local interchange. This is also the west end of CN's trackage rights, and their main curves off to the right into the tunnel and then makes a sharp curve underground to then cross the BNSF at grade and the Mississippi River. We move a couple blocks northwest to the end of Sinsinawa Avenue to watch this eastbound grain train roll through. Next is the local that runs this section of the line, RSHI 812. Today, the 2296 is leading this train south, but needs to hold short of the control point for opposing traffic before they can start their work here. This job is a long-distance local, originating all the way in La Crosse, generally running south Mondays and Thursdays all the way to Savanna, then running back north on Tuesdays and Fridays. From what I've gathered, on Wednesdays they run a turn to East Dubuque. Here they continue to wait on this westbound empty ballast train headed to Minnesota for more loads. Here's the main reason why we're here. Canadian National's M338 coming out of the tunnel here onto the joint trackage. 338 runs from Waterloo, Iowa to Kirk Yard in Gary, Indiana, navigating all sorts of scenic trackage on the ex-Illinois Central. Our first stop in the Badger State is the Findlay State Recreational Area, a couple miles north of East Dubuque in Hazel Green, to see an executive Mack nose out on the rear of this empty ethanol train. We look at the same spot, but from along the CPKC main line across the river to see this Hotshot Z race east. Views like this are somewhat common along the mighty Mississippi. We shoot north to Potosi, a unique little town built in a valley carved by the Potosi Creek with just enough room to put houses on both sides of State Highway 133. We watch this eastbound hotshot fly by on this misty autumn afternoon. Next up is Cattsville, a town nearly smack in the middle of the two nearest river crossings at Dubuque and Prairie du Chien. This quiet little town does have its own ferry to bring drivers across to Iowa. Here we'll see this eastbound manifest train as the ferry makes another trip across the river. Next is a little hole-in-the-wall town called Glen Haven, and when I mean hole-in-the-wall, I mean it. A small valley maybe a quarter-mile long by about 300 feet wide that has a church, 2 bars, a post office, and a handful of houses. A cool little place to enjoy a Mississippi River sunset and watch trains fly by, this ballast move being an excellent example. Next, this Hotshot Z screams over No Name Creek, past Control Point, and along 2 manifest trains being held here, the first of which having a teardrop ES-44 from the Canadian National. Moving further upriver, we skip to the tiny community of Wilding, where this westbound empty grain train with an SD70 ACE on the point screams by. This community is located just south of the state park that shares the same name. Just north of here, the BNSF shrinks down to a single track for about a mile to cross the Wisconsin River and the WSOR. We're now at Point Lookout inside Wilding State Park. This is an amazing spot to watch the sunrise as trains fly by while enjoying a cup of coffee and glazers from the nearest quick trip, like we are this crisp autumn morning. The first train here is Ethanol Empties from the CSX headed to the RCP&E. In the distance at CP Crawford, our empty cans meet a short eastbound Q train. This is one of the peak season trains BNSF runs only between October and December. This viewpoint is in an amazing spot. Across the Mississippi River is Pikes Peak State Park and the CPKC Marquette Sub, which we will follow in a different program. The elevator is in McGregor, Iowa, while Prairie du Chien is across the Wisconsin River. Hunters are also out this morning, as if I remember correctly, this is the last weekend of shotgun season. We now catch this Chicago to Portland Hotshot Z in perfect morning light. Our next spot is CP Crawford. This is the north end of the single track where BNSF crosses the Wisconsin River and the Wisconsin and Southern Railroad. Here this eastbound Z takes the high-speed turnout, hoping to make up some time. After meeting the Z in Wildlessing, this westbound V train works its way back up to track speed. BNSF elected to install a one-way low-speed diamond, or OWLs for short, bringing the Wisconsin Southern over the Aurora Subdivision. Unit sand and grain trains are the only things that get interchange here, otherwise all other freight goes via the Belt Railway of Chicago. Jumping off the BNSF onto the Wisconsin Southern Prairie Subdivision, we catch train L724 make its final moves of the day. This is St. Ferrioli Island Yard, located on the west side of Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. St. Ferrioli Island is also where the BNSF interchanges grain and sand trains to the Wisconsin and Southern. Trains come off of the BNSF at Crawford, then follow the WSR tracks up to here, where power is shuffled before a 724 crew brings the train east on WSOR's Prairie Subdivision. This train would go down to the sand loader about a mile railroad east and tie up for the evening. We're back along the BNSF at the corner of Webster and Illinois streets to catch this westbound loaded sand drag take the curve and fly through town. The BNSF parallels Illinois Street for about 9 blocks and trains do all of track speed here. This train was loaded at US Silica in Ottawa, Illinois and was interchanged with the BNSF at Eola Yard by the Illinois Railway. We move north to Black Hawk Avenue under the cover of night to see this eastbound stack train with international stacks fly through town as a thunderstorm brews in the background. We're just north of Lynxville. A barge works upriver as this Hotshot Z rolls to a stop to meet this westbound manifest from Chicago. Presumably this had to happen due to maintenance of way closing one of the main tracks. Looking towards where we just came from, we can see this empty BNSF grain train flying along the riverbank. This is one of the newest trains on this line due to the new Alcivia grain loading facility in Hager City, Wisconsin, which just opened in early 2025. The town of Ferryville also has a few nice viewing platforms as well, one of which is where we watch this eastbound international stack train with an ace on the head end rocket down the river. When I shot this, the Mississippi River was in its flood stage, characterized by the murky brown water. If you pay attention, the dock where we saw the last train is completely submerged by the floodwaters. We're now in DeSoto watching this vehicle train run around this tied down loaded grain train. Crew availability was all screwed up on this day, leading to Main 2 practically becoming a parking lot. All the new rock and riprap is here due to the flooding of the 2023 season, which caused a major derailment on this line about a mile south where a Z-train flew over a washout at 52 miles an hour. Luckily, the crew survived with no injuries. We're now in the small town of Genoa. This town was the site of the Dairyland Power Boiling Water Reactor and Genoa 3 coal-fired generating stations, both of which have been demolished in 2019 and 2024 respectively. We're situated on the south side of town at Lock and Dam number 8, seeing the crew of the Ingram Barge Company's Dennis T. Delaney move the first half of their set through the locks upriver. Meanwhile, we watch as this eastbound Belt Railway bound manifest rolls by. we'll see two different empty grain trains at Stoddard. These trains are affectionately known as earthworms due to their overwhelming presence of BNSF-owned hoppers, most of which are painted in a version of freight car brown. Just a couple miles north is the entrance to Goose Island Campground, which is an amazing spot to stay along the shores of the Mississippi River. We'll watch this westbound manifest get a light into La Crosse as this eastbound Z screams by. We're now officially within the city of La Crosse, looking southish towards one of the many bluffs overlooking the river valley. We catch this Hager City-bound grain empty one last time, featuring another friend of the channel on the throttle. One evening, we caught BNSF's YLAW 202 on the industrial branch at City Brewing Company, switching out its only active customer on this branch. Today's power features 2296 again, which is generally one of the captive units for La Crosse. At the time of recording, this was a late afternoon job, so we enjoyed the last bits of sunset here in this 4 minutes of industrial switching action. We're now on the other side of town and a little to the north at Main Street, back along the main line watching this westbound Q train ease its way closer to the La Crosse terminal. As the tail end of our train rolls by, we look up towards our next spot, Grandad Bluff. Looking north, we can see this eastbound manifest roll through its first mile on the Aurora Subdivision, as well as the Quick Trip corporate complex, which includes a bakery, ice plant, kitchens, distribution center, and corporate offices. We're standing 300 rail miles from Chicago Union Station, although the modern Empire Builder doesn't follow the historic route along the former CB&Q, favoring the CPKC route through Milwaukee.
On the ground protecting, let's back up to 20 cars. Over clear, form the ground, back up 20.
La Crosse is the end of the line for our program. As the railroad's western terminus of the Aurora Subdivision, we watch as this yard crew shuffles cars for local and faraway customers on the BNSF system. The diamond here is owned and controlled by CPKC due to Amtrak's presence, so BNSF's Grand Junction control point is just south, hence the duplicate sets of signals. The close controlling the movements across the diamond, and the further set controlling movements through the crossovers. There's also a control point called North La Crosse just north of the diamonds, hence the duplicate signals on both ends of the diamond. A demonstration of the signaling is in play here for this Chicago-bound manifest. They have a high green for both the North La Crosse and CPKC controlled signal, then have an approach medium at the BNSF Grand Junction signal. As the manifest fades into the distance, the yard job uses every bit of length they can out of the yard lead. Thank you for watching this feature-length documentary on the BNSF Aurora Subdivision. This is part 1 of the Mississippi River Series, where I cover both BNSF and CPKC's lines along the upper Mississippi River. The next part will cover both railroads between La Crosse, Wisconsin and St. Paul, Minnesota. In the meantime, there will be plenty of more uploads, so consider subscribing and checking out these other videos. I look forward to some of these upcoming projects, and I hope to see you next time on the JRTHEES channel.